Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Gruesome and Grotesque video. As always, I just do these videos randomly when I come across something that I feel should be placed here within this playlist, such as the case with this suggestion that was from actually a few years ago. So I was looking at some recent suggestions and then going backwards into some of the older ones, and I remembered about this one, so I definitely felt I should talk about this one here. Also because it eerily parallels one of my most famous videos that I've done here on this channel, the John Jones caving incident. This was the one where it involved that poor guy who ended up getting trapped within that specific cave, that Nutty Putty cave, and just ended up having a very horrible, very gruesome death because of it. Well, it eerily parallels this story because not only does it have the same traits, but instead of one person, there's actually six. Can you believe that? Six lost souls that were associated with this disaster. And it's been a little over 50 years, in fact, since this occurred. So lots of information to showcase here with regards to this incident. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. It goes by several names altogether, but the most common one I've seen is called the Mossdale Caverns disaster. So again, let's talk about all the information here. I'll give my own thoughts and opinions. Those of you that are fellow cavers, if you have anything involving more information on this, let me know too, because I always love to hear, especially those of you that do this type of activity, what would cause somebody to basically find themselves within this situation. So yeah, so what was the Mossdale Caverns disaster? Well, that was something that occurred again over 50 years ago, just a little over 50 years ago, back on June 24th, 1967. In fact, it remains United Kingdom's most disastrous caving incident even to this very day. That's because in this time period, 10 cavers entered that particular cave. Only 4 made it out, and the rest of them, all 6 of them, ended up just tragically passing within that cave itself. Let's talk about that cave first, too. The Mossdale Caverns is located there in Yorkshire Dales, England. And in fact, if you wanted to go even specific, you'll find it there about 5 kilometers north of Grassington, just a little bit east of Coniston, and then there where Mossdale Bay sinks into the base of Mossdale Scar. The idea is it's pretty remote. In fact, at one point, when one of the people was running to get help with regards to this incident, closest person that was around was more than 3 miles away. It gives you an idea essentially of how far and remote this location is. You have to get to it with some effort, and that doesn't even include getting into even the caverns themselves. The caverns go pretty deep. In fact, apparently they go up to about 250 feet deep, but it's the length that is considered tremendous when it comes to these caverns and why it's considered such a dangerous place to explore. They stretch almost 10.5 kilometers or 6.5 miles in length. Can you believe that? So we're talking something over 6 miles, maybe up to close to 7 miles if you wanted to get from one point to the other. All along that way, this is considered a super challenging cave system. In fact, the classification of it is called super severe. Those of you that are cavers, again, let me know essentially what that means, but I imagine that's the top level, right? Like that's essentially as high as you get. This is because there's so many areas there that are prone to flooding, so many passages that involve getting almost neck deep into water. This is without additional rain, which was what ended up causing the tragedy that I'm about to talk about here in a few minutes. And then also there's so many areas that include locations where you can just get hopelessly trapped. In fact, one place I was reading, it said that less people have gotten to the end of this cavern than there have been people on the moon. It gives you an idea that, in other words, how few people have successfully gotten to the end of this place because of the risks involved. In fact, I was reading one other area that said that one of the top personnel, one of the top cavers that decided that heard about this story or heard about this location, he dared not go into this particular set of caverns because of the difficulty associated with them, because of the dangerousness. To give you another idea of how dangerous this place is, if you excelled at everything and you got from the very beginning to the end of the cave and then back, it would take you somewhere around 6 to 8 hours. I'm sorry, 8 to 10 hours in total to be able to do that. Again, that's not considering all the dangerousness, all the squiggling, and then also being able to squirm yourself between tight spots and then get into that neck deep water, and then probably even submerge yourselves at certain points. All of that still has nothing to do with the time period. So that's if optimal conditions are met. Again, it gives you a whole idea that this is a cave that's not for anybody that's new, and even somebody that's experienced. It's still altogether very, very dangerous stuff. Again, it's a world outside of my world. I would personally never ever get into that situation. I'm not claustrophobic per se, but I know that that's a dangerous spot to be in. The idea that you could be just that far deep in and that far in terms of length in the darkness, and then having just sudden conditions change, that would lead to disaster within moments. That's just a little too much for me. So I know a lot of people find that exciting, being able to go into those kind of caverns and then explore them and then squirm within tight spots like that. That's just not for me. As you can see from these pictures from the caverns themselves, this is essentially what you would get into if you were able to do so, although that place, I believe, is not open anymore. More on that here in just a moment. So now let's get to the actual disaster itself. Again, June 24th, 1967, that's when 10 cavers decided to go into that location. And 4 of them were only there apparently for just a short time period. They were there for, I think it was called a day trip. And so they were there, they were able to get to a certain point, but then they decided to head back. They decided that that was far enough for them. And the other 6, who involved the following personnel, they were Michael Ryan, who was the youngest of the group at 17, Bill Frakes, who was 19, John Ogden, who was 21, Colin Vickers, who was 23, Jeff Biorer, who was 24, and then finally Dave Adamson, who was 26. They all decided to just continue onwards into the cave themselves and see how far they could get. In fact, at a certain point, they ended up getting, I believe it was 450 meters in to an area. There was a watershed location that was found between Wharfdale and Niderdale. Don't know exactly where that's at, but that's essentially as far as they got. The time period was around 2:30 p.m. when they all started this trek. There was the time period obviously during the day. Conditions outside were fine, it seemed. And in fact, I was reading information that during this time period, during these set of years, there was a sudden popularity when it came to going into caves. Like all of a sudden, it was just a trend. So this must have influenced these younger guys there at the time, because they in turn wanted to also experience this. I believe they were already actually seasoned cavers. Like there were some ones that were able to have some good experience from before. Don't know how far back it goes, especially with the younger ones, like the youngest one of Michael Ryan at 17. But they saw this cave as a challenge. They saw it as something to be able to trek into and then be able to notch it up as being able to successfully complete it and say that they were there, at the Mossdale Cavern, and they were able to just finish it all together and then make it back safely. Of course, that didn't end up happening, because what occurred next was simply every caver's worst dream come true. It was shortly after those 4 cavers decided to leave. In fact, those 4 cavers got as far as part of a location called a rough chamber when they went back to the surface. And that's when one of them, a girl by the name of Morag Forbes, noted that it was raining outside. What was interesting to note was that those 6 guys, the ones that ended up tragically passing from this incident, they had stated that they were going to continue and they were going to use dynamite to make new passages, to basically go blast away into new passages. Makes me wonder, how obviously safe that is to do so within the inside of a cave. If you blast something, anything within a cave, what's it take for essentially everything else to come down around you, or let alone open something that suddenly causes disaster. Like all of a sudden, a new entrance is opened. You take it, but then you realize that there's no way to get out afterwards. But that was the idea. That's what they were going to do. And so that girl, Morag Forbes, decided to wait and wait and wait. She waited about a mile towards the southeast entrance. And then that's when she saw that instead of rain, now it started to pour. In fact, it was raining pretty heavily. She knew that this was the worst disaster that could occur to anything involving cavers, because what looks like a little rain outside could be torrential on the inside of a cave, and then to have all of a sudden it be raining very large outside, you can only realize that it takes just minutes for that to change on the inside of a cave. What would be something that would be just maybe feet deep could easily become waist deep and then more in water within a short time period. So when she saw that they were not returning, she decided to run as quickly as she could to see what the next step was. In fact, she did this twice. Apparently, she left, she came back, and then she left and came back again. And then that's when she saw, to her horror, that the cave entrance, the one that they had used, this was completely flooded. She had no idea, obviously, where these guys were from inside the cave, but they were still in there. And now, all of a sudden, the entrance that they had used, the entrance that they presumably would get out of as well, was gone. It was flooded. It was completely flooded. It gives you an idea, essentially, of where that water was, because if it could flood up all the way to the front of the entrance, imagine the rest of it on the inside would have been completely flooded as well. And so again, she ran as quickly as she could. This time, I mentioned earlier, 3 miles away to the nearest location. It was a moorland to Yarnbury, and there she raised the alarm about what occurred. And then that's when, shortly before midnight, there was a bunch of people that were now there trying to essentially rescue these poor guys that were there stuck within that cave. Now, the stories as to what occurred in the inside of the cave while those guys were all there as it was flooding, it's kind of hard to say because, again, there's no description from them. They were the only witnesses, and those guys, of course, tragically passed away. There was nothing else. But I was reading one article from independent.co.uk that was presuming that they were almost like joking, probably at one point, thinking to themselves, "What's that rumbling noise?" It's an indication you don't want to hear, because usually that type of rumbling indicates water, and then water that starts gushing in all of a sudden. And so they realized, every caver's nightmare, that all of a sudden that water started filling everything up. That's where things take a little different turn. It kind of ties into another caving incident that I was talking about a couple months back. The idea that you start panicking. Even the most experienced person will start panicking, because in that darkness, you start looking about and the water keeps rising and rising. And so you start making bad choices that will normally not be done under less severe circumstances. And that's presumably what happened here. In a very quick state, the water just kept rising and rising on them. They would try not to panic, but they would still do. And when that happens, they would realize that they would get to another location, and that would be probably even worse than where they were before. And at that point, you have no idea which direction you're in. So claustrophobic, so horrible, so gruesome to be in that spot, because now the water is getting up to basically your nose, and you're at the top of the actual ceiling itself, and then it's filling all the way in. What do you do at that point? The other incident that I was talking about as well stated that people start accidentally creating sedimentary, like they start kicking everywhere, and then that causes more things to clog up. What was like clear water could then start turning murky, and then could be just completely filled with sediment that you can't see anything in front of you. And that's horrible. Like, that's nightmarish stuff. That's essentially what happened to these poor 6 guys. They were there, they were trying to do the best they could in that situation, but you can only do so much, because with the water inching quicker and quicker, and then the sedimentary making it impossible. And then even if they had lights of some sort, imagine those lights going out in the darkness because they're shorted out from the water itself. That's it. That's done. So the article I was reading stated that they must have very quickly realized that this adventure that they had would have been essentially their tomb. They thought this surely couldn't happen to someone else. I mean, this wouldn't happen to them. It has to happen to other people, to someone else, but it ended up happening to them. So outside of the cave itself, the rescue continued. In fact, there were fire people that were there. There was a group called the Upper Wharfedale Fell Rescue Association that were there as well. This rescue attempt ended up going for 4 days. It shows the commitment that these people had to try to rescue these guys. 4 days they were there. They brought in an excavator at first to try to dam the cave entrance. And then after that, they started to create a location, like some kind of trench, to help divert the water. And then on top of that, fire service pumps were used to try to lower the water as well, but they could only do so as quick as at a certain pace as possible, as quickly as possible, but they couldn't make it in time. In fact, it was about maybe 2 days later, somewhere around there, that they were finally able to get in. Finally, when the cave entrance was just under 4 feet of water, that's when they could get underground, some of those rescuers, and then they went as far as they could, and then sure enough, their confirmations were unfortunately coming true. That's when they found at least 5 of the bodies of these guys, and this took them 5 hours themselves to get to that point, just to be able to find them. This was in an area called the Far Marathon Crawl, which is a long 10-inch high section of the system. That's insanity to me. No, I'm not doing that. 10 inches high, that's how big that section was. That's where those guys were stuck. They were stuck in an area where they were crawling like worms, 10 inches high, as the water was surrounding them. What an absolutely insane way to go. But that's where those guys were found. They were found right there. Oh my goodness. You just have to, you can't you can't realize just how severe that condition is. I have no idea why somebody will put themselves in that place, but they did. They were in that far marathon crawl, 10 inches high, crawling along as the water was surrounding them as quickly as possible. That's where they got to, and that's where they found the body. And then the last body was found 2 days later in a narrow fissure shortly nearby. This was the body of John Ogden. So it looks like he made it a little bit farther away, but ultimately his fate was the same as his colleagues at that point. This is where things take a interesting slash unique change afterward, because when the bodies were found, they were essentially left there as is. Again, this harkens back to the John Jones incident. In fact, the bodies were left in situ, which means basically on site, on the premises, in place. They were left there as is because it was considered too dangerous to try to bring them up to the surface. At any point, anyone that was there trying to rescue the bodies could find themselves in the same situation involving the rushing waters. Maybe there's more rain that suddenly comes in. So the bodies were left there as is, and the cave was essentially sealed. It was sealed as a grave, again, harking back to the John Jones incident. But at an interesting another turn, after 3 years, another group of cavers ended up breaking through the seal. They found the bodies again, but then they decided to give them a final resting place. So rather than leaving the bodies in the areas where they were initially found, they took them to another chamber and then gave them a burial right there. I guess as far as you can do in terms of burials within the cave itself. And they ended up calling that place the sanctuary. And now a plaque now marks the location outside of the cavern itself. So that way, if you go there to this day, I believe it's still sealed. Like after those cavers, the ones that broke the seal and found the bodies and reburied them, I think it's been sealed again. So you can't really go in. Although I was reading in another site, it was stating that unofficially, you can still find spots to be able to crawl into the cave itself if you dare to do so, but otherwise it's not considered open to the public anymore. But in either case, this plaque marks the entrance of those 6 guys, those tragic souls who all ended up passing away, all at young ages, all because of their intention to try to conquer this cave. And obviously what happened afterwards was the ultimate disaster for any caver altogether. But then that's pretty much it. That's all the information associated with the Mossdale caving disaster. So if anybody again has any more information, any other items that I forgot to mention or didn't list, please post it in the comments below, fellow cavers. Any of you know more information on the Mossdale Caverns disaster? If so, then please post it in the comments as well. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.